The end of the world is just the beginning. That is a rather flagrant statement, but also the title of this book by Peter Zeihan. Published in 2022, I'll be reviewing it today. So let's hit the music, kick back, and talk about it. First up, welcome to the second channel. This video is going to be the first video on this channel. This channel is going to be much more relaxed than the main one and pretty much have stuff that would never find place there. Also, if I want to relax or just be online, I'll be here. This book is something I came across as part of research for the video that I now have live on the main channel. And again, if you haven't seen that and if you're interested in this book at the end of it, check out the link in the description. Go watch that. I think you might find that also a bit more of an interesting topic. Having said that, this book was one of the foundational research pieces. I first saw Peter's interview on the Joe Rogan Experience. I had it in the background. I was doing some field work, so there on the right. But I never really paid a lot of attention to it, except the fact that his family name is Zeihan. Very close to Zohan. Don't mess with the Zohan.
He's Zohan.
So somehow that name stuck with me. And so when I actually came to researching for this video, I knew where to start. Because for some reason that interview stuck, and then Elon Musk was going around, even though he doesn't credit Peter and his book chronologically, that's how I saw it play out.
That there's no accountability? No.
So I wouldn't be surprised if this interview that Peter did on the Joe Rogan Experience was the catalyst for Elon Musk suddenly becoming quite pro-natalist. Even though 14 kids in, I think he's just hiding his perversion behind pro-natalism. I care about humanity. I'm a good guy. No, you're just perverted. But I do want to talk about the book, right? Because this book goes through a few more, I would say, topics and themes that are much more wider and important for society as a whole than just population dynamics. In fact, population dynamics is there in the very first chapter. It just establishes the fact that they are changing and globalization is going to fall apart. So let's talk about the book as a whole. If you're going to read the book and you want to know where the author is coming from, I would say read the very end of the book first, the epilogue. That is where you'll figure out who the author is, because there are some biases in the book. There's a certain tone in the book and you might not appreciate it, especially if you're not American. But do read it, and I think if you read about the author in his own language, talking about who he is, it'll place a lot of things in the correct perspective. So Peter is a geopolitical analyst, all right? He's American, and that is going to be very foundational to how he writes this book, how he talks through the book. I would prefer if he hadn't done that, but I will give Peter some credit. He has also supported his facts, supported his biases, and also tried to counter them where he can. Having said that, all throughout the book, there's going to be a certain undertone where America is just seen like, yeah, good guy, awesome, intelligent, and then everyone else is seen as dumb, taking shortcuts, lost in the world, lacking the I would say just the American greatness. They're just not good enough. It is not as simple as Peter presents it, and countries like China, Russia, they're not as dumb or lazy as they're made out to be in the book. So pretty much in the first chapter we established two things. Globalization is important for society, but it is possible because trade and peace in the international waters is made possible by the US. That is foundational, and I think he's pretty much right. He's not wrong about that. The American hegemony in a lot of things has made sure that they're the villains in every other country's story, but also the fact that there is more peace in the world than there would be if we had more regions of power. But that's just a fact. And you may disagree with it. It doesn't really change much because functionally, some of the things he's relying on and the facts that are there, that is how it is. But there is the second fact that we have as our premise, and that is that population dynamics are changing. The US is the predominant consumer across the planet, and that is changing. They will, at some point in the future, just because of their own population dynamics, not remain the global hegemony. And that is seen as the foundation, all right? Out of 8 chapters, that is the first one. That's pretty much the introduction. Then we start moving through different sections of societies. So we start with finance. We talk about how the history of finance used to be, and then how the American dollar came to be the reserve currency. And then we talk about what would happen if globalization collapsed. Would BRICS come out with their own secondary currency? Would we have more than one currencies taking place of the American dollar, or would it be yuan?
Again, I implore you to remember, fuck your puts, fuck your calls. Jay Powell has you by the balls. God bless my money printer.
I think that's definitely up for debate, but we start talking in this very simple narration. What the history is, where we are today because of that history, and what we can expect in the future as globalization collapses. So we started with finance, then we go to transportation. How challenging transportation was, how large volumes of trade make it financially viable, and what do we expect trade routes to look like in the future when global hegemony is no longer the norm? And so we build into energy, raw materials, manufacturing, and right at the end is agriculture. Agriculture relies on globalization in the form of finances, raw material, energy. Everything we discussed before kind of builds in. So we start with one of the more independent sections like finance, but then finance contributes to everything else along the way. And the book builds on that complexity. We start with the most independent section of human society, but by the end of it, we've pretty much covered everything. I think healthcare is probably the only one that's left outside of it, but it's pretty much touched by everything else, so I wouldn't say it's directly left out. So in each section, you start seeing this theme emerge. We talk about the history, talk about the present, and what we expect is basically these regional powers, so like India, China, the EU, Russia, the US in its own area, they will pretty much become dominant, right? And they will control how things like trade and research, how they happen in that area. Now, there's a lot of detail into that, and that's something if you want to dive into, just read the book. And this is one of the reasons I think it's very important for more or less everyone to read this book. Not because I always agree with Peter's narration or predictions.
Crypto. Yeah, it was always a hot dumpster fire.
Always?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not going to say that it was all fraud. Some of it was a pyramid scheme. There's never been anything there. It serves no purpose. It's not a store of value. It's not a medium of exchange. And as we have seen, if you want it decentralized and not under government control, it is a haven for fraudsters. And now it is in the process of going to zero, except for Bitcoin, which will probably go negative, because if we're moving into a world with carbon taxes, you have to take into account the energy that it took to produce it in the first place.
But I think it's a very interesting way to look at the world, and a lot of us don't, including me. Before this, I wasn't really paying attention to this concept, but now I am. We saw the global pandemic happen in 2020, and just look at that. Some supply chain disruptions, we still not recovered from it, right? If you try to curb inflation, it's still out of place. The wealth inequality just skyrocketed. It's getting worse and worse. What do you think would happen in the future? And what we understand is that basically this. Life will become far more unaffordable. And that is not going to be good, right? And so Peter sees this as a collapse. Humanity will be forced to collapse because this rather boom we've been having is going to cease. And yeah, it's going to force basically that whoever got ahead, and who could not will be stuck where they are. It's things like these that made me wonder, is that the reason why Warren Buffett had been buying oil for the last 5 years? There's another trend I would say that I saw while I was reading this book. Every time humanity has chosen to cut corners or overlook, I would say, their morals, their cut out redundancies, resilience, basically in the form of human rights, environmental laws, things like that. Whenever we cut those corners, there's this invisible debt that just plops up later. Now I want to rate the book. All right, so I'm going to give it a score out of 5 on 5 different areas. This is a work of non-fiction, so let's talk about first one, originality. I would say 5 out of 5. This is a very novel thesis, and even if there are other books or authors who've talked about the same topic, this is a very novel way to explore, narrate, as well as predict the future. So 5 out of 5. I'm not going to take a single point away from Peter. He's done a good job. But information. That's my second criteria. I think this is a very wide topic, very wide thesis. It's a very wide scope that Peter has encountered. So I will give him some grace there, but there is a lot of information missing. There's a lot of ifs and buts, right? We do not even mention how, like, okay, capitalism, great, but are we going to talk about the CIA at all and what it's done all around the world? And sure, he predicts that capitalism in the US is going to be replaced by mercantilism or imperialism, but why only those two, right? I feel there's a lot more information that could be put into this book, but if it did, it would be 5 volumes long. So again, I understand. I'll give him some grace, but I would have loved to see a bit more information, a bit more, especially if you're doing predictions, you want to understand the probability of other outcomes as well. So on that front, 3 out of 5 for me. So the next one I want to talk about is language. 4 out of 5. Very simple language. It's almost there. I am not from geopolitics, and most of you won't be either. The book is easy to understand, but I take away a point. Because some of the narration, it's just so, what do I say, casual. It's so casual, I don't like it. It becomes cringy. It's like a boomer trying to talk to a millennial and trying to be like cool and like casual about it. It's not. This is not. I just did not like that, especially considering the fact that we're discussing and dealing with a rather complex and mature topic. So some places his humor was hit and miss. I'm going to take away all the points from it, but it wasn't perfect for me. The next point I have is engagement. Again, I'm going to give it a 4 out of 5. And the only reason I say 4 out of 5 is, again, if you're not American, there's a lot of detail and exploration of how different parts of the US will do certain things, in his predictions, as well as in his examples. So, unfortunately, I'm not American, so I think a lot of other Americans will also not really find that entertaining. And I skip those pages and paragraphs. But apart from that, right, when he's not just driving down the American highways and different states, this book will keep you engaged. It's a very interesting storytelling he's done throughout the sections, and it almost makes you forget how complex this topic is and how serious the nature of our conversation is, but he's done a great job. So 4 out of 5. I just take 1 point away for being too fine-grained into the US, but now that you know his bias, it was kind of inevitable. And finally, relevance. Am I just covering a book that's talking about something that's not very relevant? No, 5 out of 5. I think everything in this book is relevant. I'm not saying accurate, all right? His predictions a lot of them I personally don't think will come true. A lot of people also doubt they will come true. A lot of his predictions on the Joe Rogan podcast, they haven't come true. They've kind of got the opposite. So, but I think those facts, right? Trying to understand where we've come from, where we are, and where we're going. Those trends are very important to see, and they're very relevant. I don't think there's any audience on this planet, maybe in Antarctica, if you just plan to live there, maybe even not then. Yeah, there's no one. I don't see anyone out there who could read this book and say, oh yeah, none of this would ever apply to me. No, I think a lot of this will apply to most of us. The End of the World is just the beginning. 4.2 out of 5. I would highly recommend reading it. Just be cautious of some of the biases, the tone, and predictions. But overall, it's a very palatable read, but a very interesting topic. And especially for me, it changed my perspective on this issue, as well as a lot of the politics I'm now seeing in my own countries. So I would recommend the same out of you. Give it a read, and let me know what you think, especially if you have read the book or seen his interviews. Tell me what you think. And if you're interested in population dynamics a bit, check out my video. I like to say I added a bit more to the general conversation that's happening out there. So give it a watch, especially if you're a young person who does not, or maybe plans to, have kids. Be strong, be kind, and I'll see you next time.